Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Keys to AWS Optimization, where today we're going to be talking about the Frugal Architect. This was released a couple of years ago, but we're diving deep into it with Wade because he has a reInvent talk. And so we're going to go through some of this laws. So if you're going to go to his reInvent talk, this will be a nice kind of primer for it because his is a workshop. And if not, then you can always check out the workshop maybe after reInvent on demand. But welcome, Wade. Before we get into it, I've got to prime you for this, but you've been on recently. You guys know Wade. Wade, have you had a frugal week or a splurgy week so far?
Well, I've definitely been working hard to keep it frugal. We're going through some of our last minute checks for this Frugal Architect game day that we're debuting at reInvent. And so we want to make sure it's perfect for all of our customers. And maybe I'm not being as frugal with the time of my teammates because I've been drawing upon a lot of the resources of the optics team lately, which I much appreciate.
Yeah, it's a big team effort to get these kind of things. So much work goes on behind the scenes, guys, for the lovely reInvent. Hello to everyone in the chat. Please always keep your comments, questions coming throughout any of your thoughts about today. Or if you're watching us on demand, hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching. And also, we watch all the comments on demand on YouTube. So please drop those in if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to follow up. But let's get into it. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Steph Gooch. I'm a senior SA advocate at AWS, here to help you on your FinOps journey. And I just realized I didn't do my frugal or splurging. So I'm going to do mine now because this is live and we can change things up. I was trying to think. I had my Halloween party, folks. If you saw the Halloween episode, and then I mentioned a few times, if you saw me on my other channels, my other streams as well, I mentioned about Halloween. I bought so much stuff and I had to stop. I even bought something yesterday for Halloween, even though it was after, but it was discounted to like 60p, so it was really cheap. So I feel like it's been very splurgy, and now I have to have a bit of a downtime before I go into the holidays. But wait, let's do your 1 minute origin story for the guys who haven't met you before. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I have a degree in marketing, but I started my career journey off in FinOps, financial operations in the aerospace industry. We'll get into that maybe a little bit here. And my job there was to help make sure that we were being efficient with our spend and working with our engineering and our finance teams to, forecast out what we are going to spend from our suppliers. And I really wanted more fast-paced environment. And one of my coworkers went over to AWS and they said, "Hey, it's really awesome here. You should go check it out." So in 2017, joined AWS, and ever since then, I've been helping our customers with FinOps. I've been around several different teams through public sector and commercial, some of our strategic accounts, and now I've landed myself on the optics team, and it's definitely my favorite team out of all of them. And we just get to work with some of the best AWS customers and make sure they're getting the most out of their spend with us and help them make a difference with their customers.
Yeah, and the customers that we Optics covers, people know, is these large ones, and nothing is as big as the Frugal Architect, which was created by Werner, but we'll come back onto that. So today we're going to dive into what is the Frugal Architect and where it came from, but also have a little look at some of the laws, discuss them, explain them, and give you some examples of what they consist of. But with that, any comments, questions, please drop those in the chat. But Wade, you kind of alluded to this, but we want to come at this from someone like you who've had background experience in the world of FinOps. So we want to share a little bit about your backstory to see how you approach coming to the Frugal Architect. So do you want to share a little bit more detail about kind of the aerospace world that you came from before?
Yeah. So in the aerospace industry, it was usually like one-way communication. So what would happen was we'd have an engineering change, and then our finance world would go get a bid from suppliers about, what's this new part going to cost us? You can't buy these things at Home Depot, right? Or, the hardware store for our international folks out there. So the suppliers would just, increase the price and say it's going to cost, more, 10%, 20%, whatever it is more to get this new part. But when I was there trying to develop like this two-way communication between our engineering and our finance teams, so sometimes finance didn't understand the design or the build process and could have fought for better pricing with our suppliers. So I think our cloud engineers can understand that, where finance might not understand what they're building. And say we had a part that was made out of the same size stock material and it just got a little bit bigger. and that actually required less time to machine it down because it's just less material we're taking off of that part. And then the supplier would
Mhm.
say, well, it costs more money. Well, actually, we're saving the supplier time in that case. It should be we should get a discount in that case because it's not costing any more for the raw materials, and it's taking them less time to machine it. And so that's where a case where finance could have went in and at least made no change to the price or even got it for cheaper. But then there's
Mhm.
times where our engineers might be making a change to try to like reduce weight because aerospace is all about reducing the weight of the airplane. They might switch a shim out from aluminum to carbon fiber because it's lighter. But in that case, sometimes we'd find that the carbon fiber shims cost 10 times more than the aluminum ones. So the little
Oh,
bit of weight
wow.
savings that we're getting, wasn't worth the price. So this is an example of where we needed engineering and finance to talk with each other, understand the build and understand the cost side of things so that we could come to the right conclusion of how we want to design, how we want to procure these parts, right? And I know that's very different from the cloud because that takes a lot of time. What's cool about the cloud is we can do all these decisions like within, hours, days, minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, those things, those conversations about the balances. Even if we think about, for example, I remember when I was a customer, I spent hours trying to deal with snapshot clear up. And I was like convinced it was going to save loads of money because I was like spending so much time on it. And then it turned out that it was like hardly a dent in it. And it was those decisions of like, was it worth paying me for several hours to go and delete stuff? No. And so those kind of balances always happen, whether it's materials or time, or like a bigger picture version of that. No, that's so cool. I remember there being a story. I don't remember which airline, which was something like they took olives out of their salads and it saved them like X amount of dollars a year because of the amount of extra weight it was and the amount of extra money it cost. Something small. It's always those small changes like make a big difference. Before we move into the frugal architect stuff, with optics and the conversations you have, I know that you guys had a lot of conversation with customers recently at Connect, right? Do you want to tell the folks a bit about that?
Yeah, so we wanted our customers to have a chance to have a peer-to-peer talk with other people that are working in the cloud, having similar problems that they're having. So the optics team put together what we call Cloud Financial Management Connect, CFM Connect, and we had a bunch of different customers meet out in LA, talk about their current state, ways that they're tackling problems in the cloud. And one of the themes that we had coming out of that was that our customers are asking for more finance and engineering and product partnership. So if everyone can work together to understand what each other's doing and break down those silos, that's going to help us be more efficient in the cloud. And then when we have product involved, that's going to help us better understand how these changes to the architecture and affect the profitability, which is ultimately what our customers are trying to do, right? They want to be more efficient so that they can make more. And that's why we want all these teams to be working together, which is essentially what the Frugal Architect is helping to do.
Yeah. And if you are interested in something similar in your area and you want to reach out and learn a little bit more, then please email costoptimization@amazon.com or any of the questions that you have about this. And I know you mentioned the engineering. We talked a little bit about the FinOps Foundation having this in the state of FinOps, but I can't remember what year we talked about it in because it's still a big challenge that we see customers do. But you mentioned, we've talked about before, the FinOps Foundation state of FinOps looking at this kind of data as well, right?
Yeah, so I believe it was 2020 through 2023. Their state of FinOps number one priority, as listed by that, was empowering engineers to take action. And I don't even think that question's on there anymore because it kind of paints our engineers in a negative light, right? Like, oh, these
Mhm.
engineers are sitting around not taking action, right? And we know for all our builders out there that that's not the case, right? And that was a big inspiration to me for wanting to create something with the Frugal Architect is from my aerospace background as well. I know our engineers would always look at the finance guys and be like, hey, stop telling me it's too expensive. I'm here to build airplanes, right? And, I think our engineers in the cloud can empathize with that, right? Is that we have to balance. It's not all about reducing cost at every single possible corner, right? It's about making efficient trade off decisions. And we'll get into that too when we talk about the Frugal Architect laws that Werner even talks about that. It's not all about just cost cutting. It's about making these trade-off decisions.
Yeah, which is a good segue. Let's bring up a quick poll for people. Da, da, da. Have you heard of the Frugal Architect? So one in the chat for yes, two for no. You can see it in there. You can drop it in. I'd be impressed to see how many people have heard of it because it's something that I think was announced a few years ago at reInvent, and so it was like a popular thing at the time, and I wonder if it's kind of permeated across the board. So a couple of yeses in the chat. But wait, did you hear about it at reInvent when it first came out?
Yeah, and I had my session in 2023 actually on the Thursday of reInvent. So it was really cool to be able to actually incorporate some of the things that Werner said during his keynote into our
Ah,
session at reInvent, which was really nice.
wow. Okay, we've had at least one no, so there is some people who have never heard of it before. With that, let's get into a little bit about the Frugal Architect. So, like you said, it was designed by Werner, but you want to give a bit of background for the folks watching who haven't heard of it before.
Yeah. So the way I like to think about it at a real high level is it's FinOps for engineers by engineers. And the way that Werner kind of described it is it's a set of simple laws for building cost aware and sustainable modern architectures. So it's kind of those guideline principles that we want to follow in trying to be efficient. And it's built based on his experience of architecting throughout his career, and it's
Mhm.
broken down into three sections, which he refers to as phases, and we call those design, measure, and observe. And there's 7 laws underneath those 3 phases.
Ah, okay. And like you said, that he designed them from his experience, and so they are quite broad, and so you can kind of add your own layers of what you. There's no, it's not like explicit. They talk about like the headlines, but he's not like, oh, right sizing explicitly falls into these things, right? It's more generalist.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of like overlap, with the laws. I kind of liken that to like the AWS leadership principles. There's a lot of overlap and tension between those. Same kind of thing with these laws. Um, and so, Werner talks about how in the cloud, customers are no longer constrained with the hardware that they have been on prem in the past, right? Which allows for this amazing innovation that customers can be doing. And we've seen tons of amazing innovation at AWS over the lifetime that we've had AWS here. But we're
Mhm.
really starting to see execs start to ask questions about cost. And over the last, he released this in 2023, but we can kind of see over the last couple of years and through the pandemic, a lot of focus was on cost optimization, right? And if we have an executive who doesn't understand their cloud cost, what a lot of times happens is they're like halt everyone, stop moving in the cloud, we need to figure out the cost, which isn't good for anyone involved, right? The
No.
customers need to be able to continue to innovate and develop. So we don't want to halt innovation because we don't understand our cost, right? And so
Mhm.
that's where this is really important, and the laws talk about that too. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, one thing I want to say about it as well is that, like you mentioned, the laws, they're not really like legal laws, right? They're more of like guidelines. I think about like from the Pirates of the Caribbean, Jack Sparrow talks about like pirate code. It's more like guidelines, right? So we can just kind of make sure we're balancing them all with one another. And again, he emphasizes it's not about saving money completely to the last penny. It's about being efficient with our resources and making environmentally conscious decisions when we're designing systems.
And that is a great way of putting it. I was a pirate for Halloween, so I'm very up on the pirate knowledge. The the interesting thing about what you said is I think that there's so many. I think with FinOps we put so many rules in that it's quite nice to have this like broad spectrum. We actually had a question we can jump into, which is how is the Frugal Architect different from FinOps Foundation? Do you want to take that
Yeah,
one?
great question. So, I think FinOps Foundation, that we definitely have a lot of builders within the FinOps Foundation. So, by no means do I want to say that that's completely from the finance point of view. But I just think traditionally, FinOps and the way that we talk about it is very finance forward, very cost forward, right? And the Frugal Architect, I like to think about it as very builder engineering forward. And
Mhm.
so, we got to make sure that if we're a finance persona, that we're meeting our engineers at a place where they understand and can appreciate it, right? And so that's where I really like the Frugal Architect, because I kind of think about it's like for our engineers, by our engineers.
Mhm. Love it. Yeah, and the foundation, there's also this element of these are laws that he's written to give you guidance on what to do, but the foundation is way more than just kind of those what they called the personas and all the kind of aspects to it in the corporate run. There's also that community side of it. So if you're interested in getting started in FinOps, joining the foundation gives you a wider spectrum of things to kind of look into. Well, you mentioned obviously to get people to do these things, but let's. Do you know what? I think we should jump into the laws themselves. I think they're going to be an interesting discussion for us. What I'll do is let me bring up the website so folks can see it. So this is the Frugal Architect website. I've put it in the chat as well. But here you can see lots of different interesting stories. He also has a podcast. We were talking before we came on about podcasts. Here's the podcast. So you can listen to episodes with large customers about how they kind of have done these things. So make sure to check these out. And in them, you can have the laws. So these are the laws. We're going to dive into each one of them and have a little bit of a discussion about them. And we want to know in the chat like what you think about the laws, how you see them applied, and things like that.
Yeah, so let's step through them. So we'll start with the design phase,
Mm-hmm.
and the number one law, or the first law, sorry, not number one, but the first law being make cost a non-functional requirement. So when we're architecting and building, we're used to other non-functional requirements, right? Like availability, scalability, security, compliance, right? And so when we're doing that and we're balancing all of those other non-functional requirements, we want to make sure cost is considered at that very first design phase as well, so that we can balance that along with the other non-functional requirements.
And when we say non-functional, is that kind of if I think of a website, it would work with or without security or with or without cost in mind. Is that what you mean by it?
Yeah, well, we want to make sure security is there, like bar none. We want to make sure
Yeah.
security is there. And so, if you're designing a website and you have say Amazon.com, for example, we're getting a lot of people's payment data. We want to make sure that it's very secure, right? And that is, a baseline requirement that we need. And we need to make sure it's scalable too, right? Because lots of people are going to go to Amazon.com during shopping, especially during seasons where there's a lot of shopping like coming up right now in the holidays. And so we want to make sure that along with scalability and security that we also consider the cost, right? We could put the biggest machine possible at running our workloads, because then we know no matter what, it's not going to go down, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we want to consider, okay, well, are we paying 2 or 3 times more than we need for that huge machine? And so let's consider cost along with all of these other baseline requirements that are a must in our architecture.
Yeah. The so when we think about these, I think, and we talk about this a lot with FinOps, is that the security and resiliency and all those things are, like you said, they're a must. They're always seen as a must because you can't get hacked and you need your app to be available. But sometimes with technical people, we're focusing, like you said, almost on the other way around of the people building the planes. It's like they're focusing on what works, not how much it costs. Well, that is the same example, yeah. But I want to focus on what works, not how much it costs, and what is right for the business, because you still need to turn a profit. And I think people forget that's like a basic fundamentals of what we need to do. So when we think about these kind of things at the start, what I'll try and do for each of them, and would probably do on each, is think about what services we can use and technically what does that mean in terms of day to day. So a big one I would see for this is things like using the new pricing calculator to figure out and forecast how much your things are going to cost. But so you can set things like a budget ahead of time to know where you should be in the right area. And the same when you architect your application, there's always that little bit of, can you just add a cost element to it? We actually did last week on making your own MCP about how to analyze infrastructure as code and have a price for it. So simple things like that to get you started, to have a ballpark, are going to make sure that you're not blowing the budget on the first day. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right. And one of the things that you said about we still need to turn a profit, that kind of brings us to the next law, which is law number 2: systems that last align cost to business. And so that means that we need to understand when we look at our cloud bill, what applications are aligned to which costs, right? If we have everything in one account in one big multi-tenant shared environment, then what happens is a lot of people are saying, well, that doesn't belong to me. That must be someone else's spend. That's not mine. And so you need to align the cost of business, which means we need some type of a cost allocation strategy, which I think is something that most of our viewers are familiar with, right? And unit cost is also part of this as well. If we can get to unit economics, like understand, okay, what does it cost to get one person to purchase through our website, or what does it cost to sell, one item that we're selling? That's really going to help us understand when we make changes in our architecture, how does that affect our profitability, right? So that
Mhm.
way, you can understand, okay, all my time going in and cleaning up those snapshots, that's not really affecting my unit cost all that much. Maybe
Yeah.
my time might be better spent, switching to serverless, for example.
Yeah, yeah, having those things in place. And you're right, cost allocation, bringing it back to business values. If anyone is going to reinvent, Andy and I are doing a session on the cost and use report, and we talk about KPIs and how you can bring in business data is so amazing, but sometimes you don't have access to business data. And so how you use data inside the car to actually create things like KPIs. But you're right, in tracking that, we do need to bring it back to the business. And I was the problem at this. When I used to be a developer, I was deploying code and I didn't see past what was on it. I just was building the infrastructure and kind of give it to the devs over there to put stuff on it. And so it didn't really matter. And so it wasn't until we started to look into this area and think, oh, well, that application is tiny. Why have we got this on a massive instance and stuff like that, where you start to do it. But it does bring it back to the business element. So start using your Cost Explorer, your Kudos dashboards, your what's it called? Care. Forgot the name. Bring all those things in and start to track your usage. Even if someone's watching today and they haven't got a cost and use report, what are you doing? Make sure it's Care 2.0 and have that thing deployed, because then at least you have the backlog of data. Perfect. All right. What's the next law we got?
Well, I think we got a question in the chat too that just perfectly
Oh yeah,
transition
let
us
me
to the
bring this
next
in.
law. So, yeah, do we have to do these in any particular order? And the answer is no. Definitely, we can kind of attack this at whatever's our highest priority item at the time. And I
Mhm.
think it'd be impossible to try to do all of these at once. And so that brings us to the next law, which is architecting is a series of trade-offs, right? So we were talking about before, like we could have the biggest machine possible, and we know that that's going to run our workload just fine. Or could we maybe focus on making sure that our code's really efficient and it could run on a smaller machine, and then we can save more money in that sense, right? So we're trying to balance those trade-offs. Of course, we don't want to go run T2 micros for all of our workloads, right? Or T3 micros. T2 is just
Yeah,
still
we
stuck
do
in
with
my
twos,
head.
Wade.
Yeah. Um, but we want to make sure that we're balancing these trade-offs, right? So it's not always about building the biggest application possible. Kind of going throwing back to the aerospace engineering, we could make our airplane super super strong and like make these parts really thick, but then that adds more weight, right? So we have to do
Mhm.
our analysis and figure out, okay, we have a certain level of safety factor, and then we're willing to like make the part a little bit lighter weight, because we know we have a margin of safety of X number, that's required.
Yeah. The it's an interesting thing, the trade-offs, because there are so many things we have to trade off in life. We're used to doing it. We're used to thinking about it in small things when it comes day to day when you purchase, even things like food. Do you go for like in your grocery stores? This is a sub question because of the as folks know who watch this regularly, I love asking Americans questions. Do you guys like have own? I feel like I've said it and it's obvious. Have like in a grocery store have own brand, and then you have like another brand. So you'd have like own brand. The only thing I think it was like Coca-Cola and then own brand one. Is that a thing?
Definitely, yeah, like
Yeah,
private label or store brand. I think store brand is a
store
pretty
brand.
common vernacular for that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because even like those things, like the trade-offs between the two is the quality effective and things like that. But when we think about it in cloud, there's there's so many little dials you can constantly push. And I think what happens is we get into a situation where they're set and they're given to us, and we're like, well, why would I change it if it works? I don't need to balance the trade-offs. I don't need to think about it. But you can get it to a point where you can level it. And a good example of this is things like Lambda power tuning tool. So when you set up with Lambda, you have to choose, I think it's your memory and your oh no, it's memory and time. No, what is it? Now, do you know, Wade? I have to Google it. Lambda power.
Is it CPU? I'm
Tuning.
not sure. And then
Maybe.
yeah, haven't deployed
Let's have
serverless
it.
in a while.
It's the thing that I'm terrible at this. I always look at if anyone in the chat knows, let me know. But I'll have a look. But the Lambda power tuning tool is a good example of this, where you can it does the like nozzle twisting for you, and it will suggest what is going to be the most efficient setup for your Lambda service. Let me pop this in the chat for folks. Which is a really great resource. But what it means is that you can have those. This one isn't really a trade-off situation, but it's a thing when it comes to Lambda. If you have it running longer with less memory in comparison, I think that's it. I think the two things is that you can configure the memory, but then it might need to run longer to do it more efficiently. But you pay per time and for the size of memory. So you want to play with it to be like, okay, if it's a really small memory, it might take like 10 minutes to run, but if it's a bigger memory, it might take like 2 minutes to run. So you have to. There you go. Memory and concurrency for Lambda. Thank you, Oscar. So you have to balance those things out. And so it's almost like not necessarily trade-offs, but it is a good thing to kind of level with it, which I was thinking about. But any other examples you have for trade-offs that you can think of?
Yeah.
Anyone in the chat
just
as well?
for that whole phase too, I'm glad you brought up Lambda and serverless, right? Because on the blogs, on the Frugal Architect website, we have one about PBS, public broadcasting service in the United States here. So Mike Norton, the vice president of technologies at PBS, talked about how as a nonprofit organization, they have a responsibility to not spend frivolously on the latest and greatest technology, right? So they don't want to always adopt the latest and greatest technology if it doesn't really, maybe drive down their unit cost, for example. And so they talked about an example where they were able to change the non-functional requirements and steer more towards serverless architecture, which was able to save them 86% on their compute cost while still doubling their streaming traffic, right? And so they probably had an older architecture to start with, and so I don't expect everyone's going to get 86% reduction on their compute cost and double their traffic. But for them, they had a really great success story by implementing some cost non-functional requirements.
Yeah, that's really cool. And again, go on the website, check out the podcast to see these different things. A good example, Cloudash says, trade-offs, right sizing reminds me of Oscar Wilde quote, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Great quote.
But to have that balance is crucial, and it takes time. It takes effort and it takes time to think of those trade-offs and think what's going to be a bigger picture benefit for your organization. John said, need to also avoid over-architecting and overpricing your product service offerings. So how do you balance those things out? Which is a great point.
Yeah, another plug for the pricing calculator with that really helps you to understand what the cost could be with different types of architectures and trade-offs, and how they might price in their end products off of that.
Anything to wrap up the design section before we move on?
Yeah, just that we're trading off the design section with these other two sections as well, right? So all of these things in moderation. So the next section is measure that we have. So law number 4 underneath measure is unobserved systems lead to unknown costs. And so Steph, you had mentioned, make sure we know Cost Explorer or QuickSight dashboard, QuickSuite dashboards, or whatever we're using as our BI tool to understand our cloud cost and usage, that we want to have access to that, right? If I'm a builder in the cloud, I should have some level of access to what I'm building and what the cost is of that. And here, I think enablement is key. There's a lot of times where I was on for the capability assessment earlier this year, and a lot of times during those capability assessments, our finance personas will say, yeah, hey, everyone has access to Cost Explorer. Yeah, everyone knows how to use it. And then we'll have an engineer be like, what's Cost Explorer? I have no idea what that is. You know what I mean? So enablement is key, because we can't expect our engineers and our builders to know all these tools that a finance is using if they haven't been trained on them, they don't have access to them.
Yeah, it's such a good point. There's always that confidence that everyone knows what this is. And people do it. I do a lot of speaker coaching at Amazon, and when we're prepping for reInvent, this happens a lot. People are like, oh, everyone knows that service. And then one person will be like, sorry, I've never heard of this before. So in your own organization, if you are a power user of any of the native products, go and check, like, do people know about this? Are people confident with it? And bring them in and make sure that you can help them and educate them on how to do it, because a lot of people might not have ever been trained how to use it or have the opportunity to go and do it. I'm trying to find the crazy episode that we did for it. If not, I will find it and put it in the comments after. But going back to what you were saying about the awareness, and also, like, it does all tie in things like KPIs you've already discussed, but what's actually relevant for your business? Do you need certain aspects to it? Do you need things on all the time? Is a good kind of example of that. But yeah, cost awareness and tracking. The amount of people that come to us and say, I didn't have a budget alert and they didn't know things were going off, or something in a random account was just spending and they didn't realize. Or one of my favorite examples is the spend that's like below the threshold. So if you remember, like back in the day, Cost Explorer only had 5 things, and then it was other, and that was it. So you didn't know what it was. It was before the CSV as well, and so you'd be like, "What's other?" And I used to do a whole bit about other. And in there was a good example. And if you haven't had this story before, then enjoy it. If you have, don't worry. But I had a manager when I was a customer, and he wanted an Excel of every service and then how much he spent every month for like 6 months. And I was like, do you really need that much data? Like, it was huge, this Excel sheet. And he's like, I want to see it. And what would happen was, because we spent so much on RDS, EC2, S3 and stuff like that, that was always like demanding the top, but it was the middle ground that was where the concerns were, where he had things like Lambda looping or idle NAT gateways, elastic IPs that were unattached, things that were just a consistent that shouldn't be there, that they weren't anticipating. And so diving into that was how he was able to manage costs that were like that middle ground. So always check the EC2 other is my advice. Brilliant. Anything else on this one before we move on to our next one?
Well, one thing you got me thinking of is our folks that are out there that are really good at observing their cost and usage, and they might have other people in their business who aren't as good. Consider doing like a screen recording of you going through Cost Explorer, kind of like Steph was just talking about. How do we navigate this? What are some things that are easy to go look at? And I find that there's a lot more trust earned from within our business, peer-to-peer type of talking like that, because Steph and I can go talk to you and we can do some enablement on that. But people always want to hear from someone just like them. And there's no one just like you more than someone else within your business, right? Even though we can provide other customer examples. So yeah, help cross-train your coworkers on this kind of stuff. Record a video and share it around. Super helpful when we're doing that. And then that kind of brings us to our next one, is that cost-aware architectures implement cost controls. And so we want to make sure that there's some guardrails, as we might say, in our architectures and in our AWS environment to help keep costs down, right? And so there's a lot of ways that this can look like in practice. So maybe we put in, here we go, guardrails, SCPs. I love it. I was just about to say that. Service control policies. Maybe we have a SCP out there that doesn't allow us to deploy GP2, for example, because GP3 can be 20% cheaper, like for like, right? And so, Steph, maybe what are some other cost controls that our customers might consider?
Yeah, let's dive into some SCP examples that I always suggest for these things. So agree GP2 or IO1, like, don't use it if you can avoid it. It's more expensive. There are edge cases where you do need to use it. That's absolutely fine. But these can prevent that. Not using Graviton or managed services. Don't kind of lose that extra 10 to 20% of spend that you don't need to. What else we got? Regions. Okay, the amount of times that when I was younger, would log into the console and be like, did I not deploy an EC2 yesterday? I'll do it again. Turns out I'm in Oregon for some reason. I'm with Wade. And wait, is that what you are?
Yeah, that is it.
Yeah.
You got it. Like, you know all 50 states, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, I can. I've been to most of them. No. But yeah, the doing that kind of thing where it's not people necessarily who are watching today, it's people who are newer, who make these silly mistakes, even to the point of, I think last week we were joking about what was the region in like the region code for something like Stockholm. And I panicked. I couldn't remember. If you're typing from memory and you're like, which region is it? I'll just put like US East 2, and then something you're not in the right one, and your resources have deployed somewhere, and then you forget about it, then it can spend money without even meaning to. And also region have big price differences. Like if you think of Sao Paulo, it's way different price to somewhere like Virginia or Ireland. So you have to be careful of that. So you want to avoid people doing it because it's easy to deploy to a different region. For example, if someone maxed out their VPCs and rather than request another one, they're like, oh, I'll just go to Sao Paulo, you're already spending too much money that you don't need to, especially in like non-production and dev accounts and sandbox accounts. What were some other ones that we came up with recently? Tagging. I know it's not fun, folks, but you can prevent people deploying with SCPs and tagging. And also instance sizes you don't want. So like the metals, the 24XLs, like things that are very rare that you should be using, then definitely kind of keep a with there. Oh, Jasper's from Canada. No worry, Jasper, you can always watch us on YouTube on demand. If you come in late, it's all good. Is there anything else on that law, Wade?
One thing I'll mention is that we implement these controls, and we want to have an exception process too, right? So we don't want to bias towards not having the controls because someone might need that middle instance, right? We want to put the controls in place and then have a exception process where maybe someone needs it for whatever edge case reason. But let's bias towards having cost controls and then allow people to go through the exception if they really need it. And then just kind of bring in another customer example for our measure. This is coming from WeTransfer, Dan Conti, the former CTO. And he said, because we didn't know what we didn't know, we started a process of adding more observability into our architecture and into our environment. And then they often observe unexpected behaviors, right? So one of the things that they found out was they had a 36-hour delay in file deletion of files that they didn't need. And that was actually costing them 16% of their storage cost. And it was hidden by a lack of kind of observability and cost controls, right? So when they're able to clean that up and delete those items sooner, that's saving them 16%. And so when we can automate those types of controls, that's really helpful to help us scale. Kind of throwing it back to your example of deleting those old snapshots, that has to do with storage as well, right? If we can automate that and have a process around that, then we don't have to pay Steph however much we're paying her, $1 million an hour to go out and delete those.
Literally. If anyone wants to pay me that, my email is hit me up. But yeah, it's a good point. Like the things that you spend the time on. The thing with the restrict thing that I used to say and still say is restrict and review or educate and allow. So you either have to, if you're going to enforce any kind of policies on do and not do, or do and not allow, whatever, to your account, you have to have a formalized review process, because if someone needs to urgently make this change or have access to it, they can't just be blocked and there be no solution. So have that. Or we say educate and allow. So day one of being in the team, what trainings do you have about what best practices are? What do you enable review processes to be in terms of how do you kind of train people up, and what does good look like when it comes to it? And then you allow them to deploy anything, but you're entrusting that they've understood it. So those are the kind of practices that I try and follow. Anything else on measure? There's only two, right?
The only two on measure. So yeah, that was I love that saying that you have there. And our example with WeTransfer kind of talks about observability as well, which brings us kind of to our last phase here is observe. So law number 6 within the observe phase is cost optimization is incremental. So we can't go, and like I was saying, we can't go implement all these laws all at the same time, right? We have to have incremental improvements with our FinOps practice. And so that also means that we want to probably revisit our architectures and our systems after the deployment and understand, is it behaving as we expected with production traffic? Is there ways that we might want to adjust things? And then balancing that again with the trade-offs of, we don't want to just go and spend a bunch of time re-architecting something we just deployed if it's not going to save a significant amount of money, right? And then we want to make sure we're automating small optimizations so that it can accumulate at scale. And we've talked about it several times throughout the laws here as well. And then monitor these systems to understand patterns and trim inefficiencies away. So a lot of times, it's hard to want to go and revisit that old architecture because we're on to the next sprint or whatever we're doing. But it's important to understand that we can make some changes incrementally over time as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the old systems. And I used to say that we didn't really go back and look. And I would wonder if anyone has any in the chat or drop us an email. How did people manage it? Would love to know. Cost optimization at Amazon.com. How do folks manage those old applications? Because we've been in the cloud, a lot of businesses for 10, 15 years. What is the review process like? Is it a quarterly thing? Is it an annual thing? Is it a people just, if you own it, you own it, and it's your job to go back? Would love to know. That's would be really interesting, because yeah, it is something that you can get left behind by, and it's not necessarily, it was like, it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation. And these incremental things, I often think of resizing and modernization is the big one, right? Is the, how are we moving to the newer forms of Graviton, and how do we, even now we're moving into, how are we moving to the newer forms of models? Like if you watch my How to Build Like AWS show this week, we talked about a carrier application that was built 2 years ago, which in AI terms is a century. It meant that, like, what would we do now? And there was new technology, there were new models, and the models are a lot smarter and more efficient. And so you need to keep those changes going. Between now and then, they were saying, oh my God, we would like it. So it would be so embarrassing if we still had this old version of Claude, but people still have M1 instances out and about in the world. So how are we not taking advantage of that? But do you have any good examples of good examples of things people could do to follow that law?
I think serverless architecture really comes to mind as well. Yeah, it's still somewhat of a new technology for our folks that have been, in development for quite some time, or people that are now moving to the cloud. A classic example of that is if you have an EC2 instance sitting around waiting to do something like resize a picture on your website or whatever it is. That's a great use case for serverless, because then you're only paying for the amount of time you're running code, rather than just paying for every hour of the day to have some resource sitting out there waiting to be called upon.
Yeah. And even, I mean, a containers, would we say, like combining those things together? I'm never, people know I'm not a container person, I'm more of a serverless person. Or you can check out my blog, how to compare the two, which you'll find the link for. But the those kind of things where it's like modernizing, moving away from the cattle, which I feel like everyone has been. I remember when I first went to the London Summit, when I first started, and I couldn't believe people gave me free stuff at a conference. It was one of my addiction to all of this stuff first started. And someone I knew was speaking, and they talked about cattle versus pets. And I remember that they used like an image of a cow on their PowerPoint. And I was like, wow, this is so interesting, because I've grown up in the cloud. And so I never really understood that people like had these machines that they looked after. And it is quite a common problem. And there's always this modernization pushes that we're trying to do. And if you have any questions about modernization, we have a lovely modernization team that I can connect you with. I'm really advertising the email today. Drop us some emails. What are folks doing? I love getting the emails, and I answer all of them. But yeah, anything else on the incremental one, Wade?
No, I think you hit it really well. To decouple those resources, we don't want to love our machines like a pet. We want to just decouple from them and be willing to move on to newer technologies when it makes sense. And that's a great segue to the final law, which is unchallenged success leads to assumptions. And so things like we've always done it this way, we really want to avoid those types of phrasing, because there are new technologies being developed in the cloud all the time. And we don't want to just adopt them for the sake of adopting the latest and greatest. But we also don't want to sit back and say, well, we've always done it this way, we're going to continue to do it that way forever. And let me call back to our aerospace example. Aerospace industry has been around for quite a bit longer than the cloud, right? Some of these companies have been around since the 1940s. And so our procurement had always handled the same way. They got an engineering change, and then they went to the suppliers, and the suppliers increased the price because they learned from those behaviors. And then the finance team just said, yeah, that's fine. That's just going to cost this much more. Right. And so we want to break that cycle of we've always done it this way, and explore new ways to, build in the cloud.
Yeah. The challenge of, if you thought about a few years ago, AI was not really something that the general public knew about, right? We heard of, is it the Spielberg film? Is that the right one? There's the film AI? I don't know who it's by, but like we know about the concept of it. We've seen films and TV shows and comics about it, but it doesn't seem so real. And now if you think about it, everyone knows Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, they're all Google AI. They're all just like Amazon Q. They just exist in our world now, and we've fundamentally changed as a group population and how we interact and do things by using these tools. And so you have to modernize with the time. But yeah, it's very interesting in how people do stuff and get set in the ways because it's easy. I always joke developers are lazy because I can do it. I can say that because I am one. But it's true. Again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is how we run. This is how we work. Sometimes it's hard to change. I think I was very much like a pushback on using Gen AI tools because I was like, oh, I don't know how to start. And then once I started, I was like, okay, I see where this can improve my workload. It's like that. But any practical suggestions of ways people can follow this kind of law?
Yeah, AI, I just want to build off that a little bit as a more of a business persona. A lot of times, I didn't want to write SQL queries or like get real deep into the code technical wise. But AI is allowing me to, gain information without having to actually write the code myself. So I can just ask a simple question, what are the 5 top resources I could save in the cloud? And it can go and scrape our current data and figure that out, right? Or I can, ask follow-up questions to that to understand those resources better and not have to, doing all the code myself. So I think AI is great for our developers. It's also great for our business personas to reduce the barrier to entry of querying the cost and usage report. Courier is becoming less and less scary, as time goes on, right? And
Yeah.
I'll just bring up maybe a customer example too that we also have from the blog. One more customer example is Tom Lehman, who was the VP of Site Reliability Engineering at Warner Brothers, and he talked about they have 400 plus microservices, they have hundreds of data sets, and how are they possibly going to go through and attack all of the cost optimization opportunities, right? And he said that, I really like this quote, we needed to embed cost consciousness into our engineering organization's DNA, right? It's about changing the culture. And that's what I really like about the Frugal Architect. It's about changing our engineering culture to treat every engineering decision in the cloud like a buying decision.
Interesting. Yeah. There are these and as you said, these quotes come from the podcast and from people using them. So go and check out the page that we dropped at the top to read more about some of the other interesting ones. Be inspired by these businesses. Okay, we've got a couple of questions, prompts in the chat. I'll just run through. Actually, I'll come back to these because these are more fun. But someone said just with Athena querying for safety doing nowadays. So yeah, spending loads of time. You're probably in Athena doing all those fun queries. It's a lot of good stuff. But yeah, upskilling. We did a whole episode on the TNC live stories on Amazon Q, all about like refactoring code and moving from one type to another. Before AI would have been a headache, like totally understandable. Would have been really hard, but this can help you produce that, change it, come up with a plan, and do that more efficiently than people can. And I think that that's going to be an exciting thing to watch over the next few years, how people modernize even faster now because it's easier and you don't need to have all this knowledge. And it's interesting to see what the future kind of holds for us in this world. But yeah, a couple of comments. People saying they love the hats. So they're from the summit. They're from many different summits, events, reinvents, and the London one is so cool. What did John said? It's important to have a roadmap and plan. Nothing changes without a plan. Commit to those changes so big changes can have some small increment steps. Yes, break those things down. It does seem scary at first, but if you break it down into more individual chunks, then it doesn't have to be those big things. And it should be fun. I think a lot of these modernization conversations we have, they sound scary, but they can be really fun. If you're a technical person, like challenging yourself to move to serverless or containers with Spot or Graviton or AI is meant to be something that you can like sink teeth into and understand. But anything else on that last one?
I think the culture thing really brings us into, the main segment or the next segment rather. What we want to talk about is, what did we create with this whole Frugal Architect laws and idea? And right after reInvent 2023, I had a customer come up and ask me, and they said, we want to implement the Frugal Architect, how we want to do the Frugal Architect. And I was just like, okay, how do I get them to do that? Right. They wanted something like hands-on. They wanted, they like wanted it more programmatized. So what can we do? Right. So I've been cooking this up over the last couple of years. How can we take this laws and put it into something practical for our customers to practice? Right. And that's where we got the idea of doing the Frugal Architect Game Day. And so for those who don't know, A game day is an interactive team-based learning platform where customers can come in and expand their AWS knowledge in like a risk-free and gamified realistic environment, right? So we don't have to worry about like moving things in production in your environment and accidentally having a something go down. We can do it in this gamified risk-free environment within the game day and practice doing stuff and putting these laws into action.
Nice. And it's going to be Monday morning. It's an early one if you're at reInvent to come along to, and we'll share the code and the picture in a minute. But with that as well, if you're going to reInvent, bring a laptop to any workshop. It's PSA for all reInvent folks. Could bring a laptop to Wade's session. But Wade, is there any other, do you guys have plans, and I don't know this, to do any more kind of versions of this maybe after reInvent with customers or things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're debuting the game day at reInvent. So the first 100 people that are customers get to try it. And we're already, unfortunately, well, or fortunately for those who have pre-booked, our pre-books is already full. And so if you want to go to the game day, make sure you get there nice and early so that you can secure your spot. And if you don't make it, that's totally okay, because we can do a bespoke game day for your specific team after reInvent as well. Make sure you talk to your AWS account team about that. And then the optics team specifically has another offering around this. And you might have heard about FinHacks before, which is like a financial hackathon. So the idea of the FinHack was to empower people into things like Cost Explorer, Cost Optimization Hub, and learn about that, and then go into their own environment and find cost optimization opportunities and implement them day up. So it was really a lot about like saving money right then and there, and getting the ball rolling, but also like impacting our learning and culture at the same time. And so we've created a version of the FinHack that's called the Frugal Architect FinHack. And it's a lot more like engineering focus and forward. Finance people and business personas can absolutely still attend, but we wanted to cater it more to our builders. And so we could do the Frugal Architect FinHack, and then part of our hands-on keyboard for that day could be the Frugal Architect Game Day or any other workshop that we have at AWS that we want to focus on, maybe like Graviton workshop or serverless workshop, etc. So we have a lot of opportunities to customize it for that specific customer at their needs for that moment. So talk to your AWS account team if you're interested in that as well. And the optics team, we might be able to put one on for you.
Yeah, and also the big thing with the FinHack is that you can do optimization in your own account. It doesn't have to be in the workshop. Like the ones that I do will go in and we'll actually delete those snapshots or delete those resources or try and move to a new monetization opportunity and actually take some changes so that you can save the money and like earn back the day. But with that, we're almost at time. So a couple of things to bring up before we finish. Wade session. Make sure to look out for ARC 309 for if you are going to reInvent and want to get in. We had a question, are we going to reInvent? Yes, we are. I don't believe that I'm streaming at reInvent while I'm there, TBC, but check out the streams. There'll be loads of cool people chatting about some of the new announcements, so do check that out. Alongside that, if you want to see any of the other kind of cost or opticsy talks, check these out. Mine are the dev track one here and the code talk one. No, it's not. That's my code talk. This one, 401 and dev 318. Those are very early, same as Wade. My first one is 8 o'clock on 8 a.m. No, mine's 8:30. Wade's is 8 on the Monday. So you've got to be in early for our sessions. Definitely there'll be dropouts, so get into the line to come and see it. Also, if you are UK based, there's something happening next year, which is super, super cool, called the Breaking Barriers Challenge, where we're doing a charity hackathon. And if anyone is in the UK and would like to get involved, please click on the link that I'm sharing in the chat now. It's a really cool opportunity to build things for charities that have these ideas and challenges they have, and actually building that. So you can choose your location. We're doing Dublin, London, and Manchester. So if you're in the area, please come check it out. Last little bits as always, check out the Customer Acceleration team LinkedIn to hear more about the amazing things that our team does, whether that's content we're producing, events we're at, and whatnot. So check that out. To see all of the episodes we've done this year and through most of the time, check out the Builder Center page to search for keys to AWS optimization, and you will come to our landing page, which has information and lots of different resources in past episodes, or on my other show on how to build like AWS, where you can learn all about customer stories that we are doing. The rabble at the end is always long. Okay, with that, thank you so much for joining us today. A couple more weeks out before reInvent and away for the holidays. As when is Thanksgiving, Wade? It's not next week, right?
Next Thursday. And is it?
It is next Thursday.
Wait.
Wait.
No, two
Everyone's like,
Thursdays. So 2 weeks from
two
today.
Thursdays.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. I have some more time for the game day before reInvent there. That's good.
Yeah, we'll be doing a pre-reInvent session next week. Just some kind of before you go stuff, a bit of fun. And then we'll be off for Thanksgiving and off for reInvent and back for a Christmas special before we finish out the year. So thank you so much to everyone who's watched today and your questions. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.